Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Don Lane, and I'm the chair of Smart Solutions to Homelessness in Santa Cruz County, and also a member of the governing board of the Homeless Action Partnership. On behalf of both of these organizations, I want to welcome you and thank you for taking some time out of your busy workday to learn more about one key aspect of our community's work to reduce and end homelessness. In 2019, the Homeless Action Partnership received nearly $10 million in one-time homelessness emergency aid program, also known as Heap, funding to provide immediate emergency assistance to people experiencing homelessness in Santa Cruz County. This two-year program comes to an end on June 30th of this year. Many folks in the community are aware that this funding arrived, but have not heard much about what happened with the funds. Did Heap funding impact the lives of people experiencing homelessness? Have more people been served? Where exactly did the money go? People have also been asking a lot about what's next in terms of funding to address homelessness. This brings us to today. Staff from the Homeless Action Partnership and the County of Santa Cruz Human Service Department's Housing for Health Division are with us today to share information about how these dollars were allocated and how they've been spent and what outcomes we've seen thus far. They'll also share information about the key strategies outlined in the new Housing for a Healthy Santa Cruz County strategic framework, which is tightly focused on reducing and ending homelessness. And they'll talk about how new funding will be aligned with the strategies in that plan. When their presentation is complete, we expect to have time for questions, and we invite you to put those questions into the Zoom chat box. We also ask that you keep your microphones muted during the presentations. In a few minutes, you'll be meeting Rainey Perez, one of the top staff members at the county's Housing for Health Division, and a woman who has worked tirelessly for many years to elevate best practices in addressing homelessness and to get resources distributed to meet the needs of some of our community's most vulnerable residents. First, right now, it's my pleasure to introduce Tony Gardner, who has provided staffing to the Homeless Action Partnership for more than 2 decades and has been a real wizard at securing state and federal funding to assist us in our efforts. Here's Tony. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Don. And thank you for all your hard work over the years to help end homelessness in Santa Cruz County. I wanted to start by talking about what is our Continuum of Care, because the Heap funding is coming through the Continuum of Care. So it's a central organizing body that works to prevent and end homelessness in a given region. And here you may have heard of the Homeless Action Partnership. That's what our Continuum of Care is called. The HAP, the Homeless Action Partnership, has a HAP governance board, and it also has a membership, and they meet as separate groups. It also has working committees. A Continuum of Care is required by HUD for securing HUD Continuum of Care funds, which we have every year, and for coordinating those funds. It has specific roles and responsibilities: planning for our housing crisis response system, applying for funds, and coordinating those funds, not only from HUD, but from the state homelessness funding sources. And our COC designates and operates our homeless management information system, which is a database of homelessness, and our coordinated entry system, which is a process for streamlining entry into our homeless programs. It sets the standards for program operation. It establishes a Continuum of Care governance charter, and it sets goals, priorities, and standards for our Continuum of Care. And it evaluates the system, how's it doing, and looks at each project to see if it's performing up to standard. And it recommends system improvements. Next slide, please. I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the Heap program itself. It was authorized in 2018 by the state. It was intended to provide immediate emergency assistance to people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. It was very much a program about, we've got a crisis of people on the street, let's try to meet their needs. Statewide, it was a $500 million block grant that was directed by formula to large cities and to all the continuums of care in the state, including the Santa Cruz County Continuum of Care, or HAP. It was available to jurisdictions that had declared a homelessness state of crisis, or of emergency. And in Santa Cruz County, every single jurisdiction, with the exception of Capitola, did so. Next slide, please. The Heap eligible uses, what could these one-time funds be used for? There were several buckets. The first was the services bucket, and this included things like street outreach, health programs, safety education, diversion programs, prevention, navigation services, and importantly, operating support for short-term or emergency interventions or comprehensive homeless services. The next bucket was rental assistance or subsidies. And this included housing vouchers, rapid rehousing programs, and prevention programs. And then next was the capital improvements bucket, which included acquisition, construction, rehab, remodeling, upgrading of emergency shelters, transitional housing, drop-in centers, permanent supportive housing, small or tiny homes, all of which serve homeless individuals and families. And the history of how it unfolded in our county. In June through December 2018, we carried out a very comprehensive community planning process with stakeholder input events to set priorities for Heap funds. Then in January, we received the award from the state, nearly $10 million for our Continuum of Care. You'll see here what is our technical official Continuum of Care name. We call it the Santa Cruz County Continuum of Care. And again, the HAP is the body. And then also in January, we issued a Heap request for proposals, seeking projects in Santa Cruz County that met the priorities that had been identified by the community. In February, we received lots of applications. In March, the awards were announced. And then between April and August, projects got started and contracts were approved. So, and the program got underway. The grants went through June 2021, and that's because as an emergency program, it was intended to last just 2 years. This graphic here, this shows, the thoughtfulness and the thoroughness that we went through in the decision-making process. I won't go box by box on it. You can look at it if you want. But the key elements of this were, the intensive community prioritization process that we went through to identify what we wanted to do with the funds. And then the competitive RFP document and process for projects. And then the convening of expert subpanels to review, score, and make recommendations of projects, and then bringing all that information to the HAP governing board for final funding decisions. So it was a very thorough process. Thanks. So how did we designate the funds? We had several buckets that were funded through the process I just talked about. The first was emergency shelter expansions and new navigation centers. So that really drove the expansion, the expansion of our winter shelter program to become a year-round program with more beds than it had before, to really meet the crisis that we were facing. And then the second idea was 24/7 navigation centers in Watsonville and Santa Cruz. And for those of you who have not heard that term, navigation center, or don't know what it means, it really means an emergency shelter that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that has a housing first philosophy that's low barrier, letting in people no matter what their situation is. And that includes case managers who are actively connecting people to housing, benefits, and health services. It's more than just a place to sleep or a place to get a meal. It's an important piece of a systemic response. So the Watsonville Navigation Center has been operating 24/7, but didn't quite receive enough funding to really work on the housing case management piece, which is a lesson for us moving forward. And then the Santa Cruz Navigation Center, we plan to acquire a building, but that has not been completed with the Heap funds due to the difficulty of acquiring property for such a project. But the funds have been used for emergency shelter operations. Then the next bucket was basic needs services. So a lot of funds went into helping people experiencing homelessness with food, with shelter, with hygiene, and other basic needs services. Then there was funding that went into housing services, which included rental assistance, shared housing, and services that reduce barriers to housing. And then finally, there was a youth set-aside bucket, and we were required to put at least 5% of funds into that, but we actually funded youth programs at 8%, and those programs leveraged our existing youth demonstration program. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Rainey Perez.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this presentation. Tony's given us a really excellent background on the program itself, and I'm going to share exactly how the funds were spent. This graphic here shows the total funds that we have allocated at this point. It's $9.9 million. That includes the $9.6 million originally allocated and accrued interest to date. You can see the grouping that we've provided here is per the state budget for this program. We have $6.9 million dedicated to services, about $1 million dedicated to rental assistance, which doesn't mean specifically rental assistance. It can be various categories of activities within that, and I'll explain more later. Capital improvements, about $782,000, youth programming, $800,000, and then administrative, which is primarily the admin staff to administer the program, stand up the contracts, manage the grant, work with the state, and so forth. And then other has to do with communications and strategic planning. So this is the state budget for the program. As Tony mentioned, we had to allocate a minimum of 5% to youth, and we actually allocated more at 8%. We had intended to fund even more, but one of the projects wasn't able to progress timely, and we ended up substituting a different form of funding for that project. So I will now walk you through how it looks if we rebucket the same funds. Next slide, please. The alignment of the funds with our new strategic framework. Earlier this year, the county adopted, and the other jurisdictions, I believe, will also be adopting a new 3-year strategic framework called Housing for a Healthy Santa Cruz, a strategic framework. And in there, we've kind of bucketed various activities into just 4 primary areas: administrative, basic needs, housing related services, and emergency sheltering. And you can see that the majority of the funding from the Heap program did in fact go to operating emergency shelters, 7.4 million. 1.2 million went to activities described as housing, 946,000 to basic needs, and 354,000 in an administrative capacity. Next slide, please. I want to highlight a few small projects. We had, very many agencies funded for services, and I will describe all of the funded agencies in a few minutes, but I wanted to highlight a couple of small projects that actually were very impactful. One of them is a housing authority landlord incentive program, where if a landlord is willing to sign a lease with someone who's got a housing voucher and is experiencing homelessness, they would receive a signing bonus. And as a result of that, we got about 130 homeless people housed using that bonus program. Another innovative program that's very small is Wings Homeless Advocacy, a powerful little organization that provides vital documents for people who are experiencing homelessness. And vital documents are very, very important because without them, people cannot get signed on to a lease, fix credit problems. You must have documentation of your identification, and many people who are homeless lose that. Wings did an amazing job, assisted about 800 people with obtaining those vital documents that are necessary for them to progress on their path towards housing. We also had a very small rental assistance program for Cabrillo College students, a prevention and housing assistance program. It was a very small program. However, it built an important relationship with Cabrillo College and allowed us to subsequently cite a TAY or transition age youth shelter program there. So we're very, very pleased with the things that small grant opened up for our community. We did do an expansion, a 40% expansion of our local domestic violence shelter, Monarch Services. That project was completed within the first year of the grant and has been operating. And then an underserved area in our county is San Lorenzo Valley, and Community Bridges brought a new hygiene bay to their Mountain Community Resources Center there, which was a really big win for San Lorenzo Valley. Thank you. Next slide. So again, bucketing this in a way that reflects our new strategic plan. We built a coalition, in this area of building a coalition. What we want to do is we want to develop strong and informed, action-oriented partnerships with key leaders and stakeholders within the community. So the administrative funding that was used from the Heap program funded the Homeless Services Coordination Office and some support work from Miller Maxfield to do a lot of that planning activity and to actually implement the program. In another area, we want to prevent homelessness, and although the primary thrust of the Heap program was to provide immediate emergency assistance to people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, it also allowed for some funding to be used for prevention. So Community Action Board had a rental assistance program that they fully expended and assisted quite a lot of people retain their housing. It's an important thing to prevent people from entering the homeless system, and the Community Action Board program was successful at that. Cabrillo College's rental assistance program that I already mentioned provided small one-time stipends to students that needed assistance with rental assistance to either remain housed or become housed. Increasing connections is another really broad category that we're using in the new strategic framework. And what it basically means is we're going to expand and improve front door programs. Those are ones that directly serve clients. There would include things like outreach, emergency shelters, safe parking programs, navigation centers, temporary housing, and supportive services. And we funded a lot, 8.7 million out of this whole category in what we describe as increasing connections. So I want to, it's a bit of a long list, but I do want to acknowledge all of these agencies for their contributions. Association of Faith Communities operated both a faith community shelter and a safe parking program. Then we had funding go to City of Santa Cruz to support encampment responses, to City of Watsonville for sheltering operations. Community Action Board operated, as I mentioned, a rental assistance program, but they also operated a Watsonville Works employment program. And they also operated a youth homeless response team. Community Bridges did, as I mentioned, the Mountain Community Resources Center up in San Lorenzo Valley, which provides hygiene services there now. The Congregational Church of Soquel operated and provided hygiene services in the Mid-County area. Encompass Community Services is standing up a new youth resource center, and funding was used to initiate that project. Housing Matters was able to keep the Poly Loft program operational for 2 years and add almost navigation style services in terms of case management, housing navigators, client stipends, flex funding, and so forth. The Mental Health Client Action Network was able to put in a shower bay at their facility in Santa Cruz. Monarch Services, as I mentioned, did a 40% expansion of their confidential domestic violence shelter. Salvation Army operated multiple shelters over the past 2 years, 1220 River Street sanctioned encampment, the VFW Hall on 7th Avenue, the Laurel Street Center in downtown, the Watsonville shelter, the Armory shelter that's operating now, and the Santa Cruz County COVID-19 shelter system has funded the Tay shelter that's currently operating out at Cabrillo College, as well as some of the other shelter costs going on there. And then Wings is the agency that I mentioned that did the vital documents. A lot of amazing programs and a lot of amazing work by our community. And I just want to express my appreciation to all agencies. If you're on this call, thank you for your work. Last area is expansion of permanent housing. This is specifically things that put people into a house. Bill Wilson Center has a youth program for shared housing, and Housing Authority has that landlord incentive program I talked about that actually signs a landlord bonus and gets somebody housed. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Tony. He's going to talk a little bit about the outcomes, and then he'll turn it back over to me to talk about lessons learned. Thank you.
Thanks, Rainey. So this slide shows, how many people were touched by Heap funds through September 30th, 2020. There were more than 3,000 people served, which is great. Of those, 1,682 were served by services only type projects. 881 were served in emergency shelters. 418 in day shelter, 227 in prevention programs, and 109 were reached through street outreach. Next slide, please. This one talks about what were the results for those people. So for the persons who exited Heap programs, how many found stable living situations? And again, this is through September 30th, 2020. It's not the final numbers. So over 1,000 people exited Heap programs, and they were asked, where they were going. So 432 or 37% exited to what we're calling stable living situations, which includes not just permanent destinations, but also some stable transitional destinations like transitional housing. And the reason we're including that with permanent destinations is since the Heap program is very much of an emergency response, that's a great outcome for the Heap program. Then unfortunately, 432 people, the same number, exited to unsheltered situations. So there's more that needs to be done with that population. Then there were 180 people who exited to other unspecified locations. And many of those were people who just left, and there was not a chance to get an exit interview, so we didn't know what happened. They could have gone to a permanent destination, or they could have gone to the streets or somewhere else. Then 98 people went to emergency shelter, and then 30 people went to institutions such as substance use programs or mental health inpatient programs or jail or, foster care institutions. So, these are some preliminary outcomes. There's really a lot more to say, and I think we'll be coming out with more information in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And one thing that I want to mention, if you said it, I apologize, but I want to make sure people know the reason that the data is through 9/30 of 2020 is that that's as far as we've gotten with reports to the state. So we did our annual report to the state in January 1, and the data was through 9/30. So the program will be ending June 30th of this year. And at the conclusion of the program, we will do a more comprehensive report that looks back at the entire duration of the program. But the data we're presenting today only has us about 65% of the way through the program. And we weren't able to provide anything more current because we just haven't done that work yet. But I do want to talk about things that we learned, both good and bad, doing this program. What we believe worked was launching innovative pilot programs. I highlighted a few of those for you earlier, and we think that some selective investment in small programs that have big impacts is something that does work and we want to do more of. We also were successful in supporting some small organizations to expand capacity, which is really important in a community where we have only a limited number of providers. It's really helpful to help smaller organizations grow. Additionally, we were able to successfully meet the immediate emergency health and safety needs of homeless people in this community through a huge expansion of emergency shelter, through new and innovative programs like the Safe Parking Program. We were able to get a lot of people inside and safe for a long period of time. Unfortunately, it was one-time funding, and some of those programs are not able to continue because we don't have additional funding. During the time that this funding was available, we were able to use it to prevent the closure of critical community services. And Housing Matters, as an example, had no funding to continue the Pauli Loft program. It was at risk of closure. And because we had Heap funding, we were able to keep that operational and even improve it to increase successful outcomes through adding resources for case management and housing navigation. And last, another really major area that we feel was a success was expanding youth services and leveraging the Heap funds along with our HUD Youth Homeless Demonstration Project Fund. So we had two projects that used both YHDP funds from HUD initially, and then we're able to expand a little bit using Heap funds. That was a youth homeless response team operated by CAB, and that's actually a collaboration with the County Office of Education. The youth homeless response team was able to benefit from funds from both those sources. And then the other one is Bill Wilson Center, which operates the shared housing program. In addition to what worked, we also learned some things that we feel like we would have done differently. What we identified is that the emergency services can address some immediate basic needs of the homeless, specifically in the areas of food, shelter, hygiene, and those were high priority areas. However, emergency services alone don't solve homelessness, and the case management, housing navigation, rental assistance, and the housing itself are what do create the pathways out of homelessness. And we did not have sufficient funding to build all of that into all of the emergency sheltering operations that we had. So new programs need to be resourced in ways that do create those pathways out of homelessness, and we want them to consciously connect to all of the existing programs and resources for rapid rehousing, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing. And last, we think that resources should be used for fewer, more high impact opportunities. So that brings us to what's next. How will we focus on funding high impact strategies? We're going to be looking to our new 3-year strategic framework. The goals outlined in that plan are to enhance and effectively target the outreach, engagement, and temporary shelter resources that are needed the most, where they're needed, to expand permanent housing exit resources and pathways, to implement targeted prevention, such as the CAB program and the Cabrillo program, so that we can really get folks the help where they need it, to prevent them from becoming homeless in the first place. Diversion and problem-solving interventions, all of these things reduce the number of new people becoming homeless. So while we're trying to solve the experience of homelessness for people that are already on the streets, it's really important to try to prevent that number from growing. So the prevention piece is really important. And then last, we want to implement new governance, planning, evaluation, communication, and collaborative action structures, as this is all outlined in our new strategic framework. And the lack of some of these structures made, I think, the implementation of the Heap program more challenging. So we anticipate that by cleaning that up, if you will, and making it much stronger, we will have a much easier time with future rounds of funding and making sure that they are effective, they are high impact, and they are really solving longer term needs and really getting folks housed. And that's the conclusion of the presentation that we have for you today. There is more information on our webpage. The systems planning section of the webpage has the strategic framework and many other documents that might be of interest if you want to learn more about what the county's Housing for Health division is doing. But I will turn it back over to our host, Dawn Lane, to field questions. And thank you all very much.
Thanks, Rini. And I do want to remind everyone that if you do have a question, just please type that into the chat box and we'll see if we can get to it. While we're waiting for some additional questions to come in, I'll start with a couple that we have now. And that is, I know you covered it in sort of, but I wonder if you could kind of just say in broad strokes, did the number of people served increase because of this funding compared to what funding existed prior to the Heap funding arriving? Did our service levels go up significantly?
In the area of emergency shelter, I can say absolutely yes, because prior to Heap, we had, really only winter shelter model through Salvation Army. We were able to expand both South and North programs to year round. So, we went from 150 nights a year approximately to 365 nights a year. We were also able to go 24/7 in Watsonville, adding all of the day services, which we didn't have down there before. So day services such as showers, laundry, hygiene services were just not available in South County. So that's net new under Heap. And the fact that we were able to expand the Monarch shelter, for example, that's a 40% expansion. So the DV shelter is serving 40% more people than they previously were able to. There are many examples like that I can give. So I would say a strong yes, we were able to serve many more people than we would have been able to do without this funding.
I add to that, the fact that the Heap program served more than 3,000 people was a great thing. That was a major expansion of the capacity to serve people before. And, I think there are a lot of people who were touched by or, served by the Heap program who hadn't received, active service before that.
Great, thank you. One question that I want to pass along is, it was noted that you talked about those reports to the state. Is the data, the deep data behind that available, or will it be available to the community in some form?
I believe the answer to that is yes, and quite possibly the state even is posting them on their website. But I don't see any reason that the reports that we provide to the state can't be shared. We've provided 2 reports to date. One was January 1 of 2019, and the other was January 1 of 2020. And they basically describe the outcomes that we've experienced so far, a short bit of narrative, and then also just the expenditures that we've had through the date of that report.
Okay. Another question that I'm going to answer is that was posted was, will the information in this presentation and the recording of it be available for people to view afterwards? And the answer is yes. The Homeless Action Partnership has a website, and that will be at least one of the places where we'll be able to post this information, and perhaps we'll find some other venues to post it as well. Another question for you. I know this is kind of a big one, but maybe you could at least give us a snapshot answer. There's a lot of discussion of new funding coming down the road now, perhaps even at a higher magnitude than the Heap funding. Can you give us an outline of some of the funding that seems to be heading to Santa Cruz County in the near future?
Yeah, so we've already gotten rounds of homeless housing assistance and prevention funding, and then there's ESGCV, which was issued for a coronavirus response, and that's actually funding 2 really large rapid rehousing programs, one with Housing Matters and one with Abode Services. Very, very critical programs that are going to help get folks out of our COVID-19 shelters, especially the hotels, and into permanent housing. Very critical that we do that, because before those programs close at the end of sheltering in place, we want those folks to get into housing and not be turned back out onto the street. That would be a tragedy. Additionally, there's Cdbg funding coming. There's some amount of American Rescue Plan funding. So there are a wide range of funding sources coming in, and they're coming in different ways. Some of them come to county, some of them come to cities, some of them come to the COC. So one of the things that our office is doing is trying to kind of build out what is that overall framework of funding look like. And I believe the next time we'll be making a report that will probably give a pretty comprehensive view of that is going to be August 10th at the Board of Supervisors. The Housing for Health Division will be presenting on the status of the strategic framework and funding for the activities and identifying any funding gaps, et cetera. So I hope that provides a little bit of an overview.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
Governor Newsom just recently announced a proposal to fund homelessness at, what was it, $12 billion, out of the statewide budget surplus, to really focus on the Project Home Key and the development of new housing programs. So
we don't know yet, though, what our allocations will be from that. So sometimes we know that there will be funding coming in that, like in this instance, but we don't yet know how much we'll get, and how much will go to a COC versus a county versus a city. In the areas of things like Cdbg, both the cities and the county receive funding. So there's funding going in a lot of places, and we're working. I wish that Tony did a beautiful diagram of all of the various complicated sources of funding, how they flow in and how we process them and flow them through. And I wish that we'd remembered to share that graphic, because it really paints a good picture of just how complex it is to manage all of these various sources.
Thank you. So we'll do a couple more. One guest asked two-part question. One was, could you define what is meant by hygiene services in that breakdown? And the other was, when you kind of look at the overall number of people in the county who are experiencing homelessness or have, what percentage were assisted out of the total number who we know of. If you can give any numbers there, that would be helpful.
So hygiene services, first and foremost, is things like showers, toilets, laundry. You know, what is it that we need to do to keep our bodies and our clothing and so forth clean? And so there were several hygiene related projects funded. One was the Congregational Church in Soquel to operate a hygiene program in Mid-County. Association of Faith Communities was able to buy a new shower trailer to use as part of their Safe Spaces and Faith Community Shelter program. MHCAN is installing a shower unit in their facility. It's just being concluded, actually, that project. Mountain Community Resources installed a shower bay. So it's how people stay clean, and staying clean is a really important part of staying healthy. The other question, can I get that repeated, please?
Yeah, yes, it was really just to get a sense of the numbers out of, you know, how many
Right.
people were served in relation to the total number of people who are or have been experiencing homelessness.
Tony, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, it's hard to give, an exact number. I hesitate to estimate. I would say a lot, a high percentage. The issue is that, the program's been operating for a couple of years, and we don't have a, totally clear sense of how many people were homeless over that 2-year period of time, since people flow into homelessness and flow out of homelessness. It's a little different from the point in time count, but, I think the program has really touched a lot of people.
Yeah, I guess I would say too, if we looked at the unsheltered population in our county from the 2019 point in time count, I believe it was about 1,200. Or maybe, yeah, Tony, help me if I've got that right. Is it about 1,200?
Yeah, the point in time, yeah, it is. Yeah.
And we know that about 800 people have been helped with emergency shelter through this program so far, and that's just through September. So, that's a pretty large proportion of our unsheltered population if you're just looking at it that way. What's the point in time count say for our number of unsheltered, and how many people who were unsheltered were helped through the Heap program to get emergency shelter? And I think that it's a large share of our unsheltered folks.
Great, thank you. So this will be our last question, and it's kind of a big one. So we've seen this significant amount of money coming in from the state and being expended on different programs and different really valuable services, but we still see so many people living on the streets and not in programs and not housed. Why is it that this funding did not, end homelessness or significantly change what we see day to day in our communities?
Good question. Good question. Tony, do you want to field that one, or?
Sure, I can take a stab at it. So I think it's important, it's to actually, given the scale of the problem of homelessness in Santa Cruz County, the resources that it will take to solve it are considerably greater than the Heap funds. And also the resources have to be ongoing annual funding sources to maintain programs over time. And the Heap program was a one-time infusion. And secondly, there needs to be an emphasis on housing solutions, getting people to housing as quickly as possible and keeping them in housing. And that was not entirely the intent of the Heap program. The Heap program was really focused on the front end of the system, the people who are right now, unsheltered and in a crisis, and how can we help them today? Now, we're very much looking toward ending homelessness and reorienting the system to be more focused on permanent housing outcomes and moving people and ending homelessness with new resources. But it's important to remember that it's going to take a concerted, sustained investment in solutions.
Rainey, would you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think that, what we know is that the scale of the problem across the nation is massive. And the state of California, it's a profound problem across the state. And we are not the only community that received Heap funding and still has a significant homeless problem on the streets of our community. We are one of many. This is in the world of funding homeless services. This seems like a lot of money, but it's really not. And providing even just a shelter bed for folks for a night is costly. And then when you add in the services that it takes to get them housed, it becomes even more costly. So we need to be careful how we do invest the funds. And as we've said, we learned through the HEAP program that just doing the emergency sheltering and meeting the basic needs, it helps people in the moment, but it doesn't help solve their homelessness. And that's what we want to try to do going forward, is to resource programs in a way that ensures that people experiencing that or participating in that program are being helped to actually get housed, so that they're not going to remain homeless. So it's a lot of work still to do.
Can I add to that? Just to bring it to a basic level, in Santa Cruz County, we just don't have enough housing. We don't have enough affordable housing. It takes housing, and we all see the complete lack of available, affordable rental housing stock. And that's what we really need to work on, which I think is, a thing to keep our eye on. How can we make sure there's more affordable housing?
On that note, we are coming to a close, and before, as I thank Tony and Rainey and everyone who participated, I want to note that one of the reasons this presentation took place in the month of May is that May is Affordable Housing Month in Santa Cruz County, and the reason Affordable Housing Month exists is to really highlight the affordable housing challenges we have in our community. And to put it simply, the solution, as we've heard, the solution to homelessness is housing. We can do all these other things, but if people don't end up indoors in a housing unit of some kind, at the end of the day, they're still homeless. So we have to remember that we're only going to get to the real solution when we have significant more affordable housing in our county. So I invite you personally to join in that effort with us to continue to support people who are experiencing homelessness with their immediate needs, but also to think about creating homes for those folks so that we're actually moving toward an end to homelessness and not just a management of the problem. So with that, I will note that there were a few more questions we were not able to get to. If in the chat you would like to put both your question and an email address, we will try to get a response to you on your questions. And again, I want to thank Tony and Rainey so very much, and also Jill, who was doing our tech support in the background to get this event put together. And thank you all individually for taking some time out of your busy day to learn more. And I hope you'll share this information with others in the community, as this is such an important continuing issue about how we are going to find the resources to reduce and end homelessness in Santa Cruz County. Thanks so much.
Thank you all very much for attending.
Thanks, everyone.